Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, March the 5th, 2021. Thermidor, when? What I'm referring to is what is called the Thermidorian reaction, and I will explain from Wikipedia. It's a common term in the historiography of the French Revolution for the period between the ousting of Maximilien Robespierre on 9 Thermidor II, or July 27, 1794, and the inauguration of the French Directory on November the 1st, 1795. The Thermidorian reaction was named after the month in which the coup took place and was the latter part of the National Convention's rule of France. It was marked by the end of the Reign of Terror, decentralization of executive powers from the Committee of Public Safety, and a turn from the radical Jacobin policies of the Montagnard Convention to more conservative positions. Economic and general populism, de-Christianization, and harsh wartime measures were largely abandoned as the members of the convention, disillusioned and frightened of the centralized government of the terror, preferred a more stable political order that would have the approval of the affluent. The reaction saw the left suppressed by brutal force, including massacres, as well as the disbanding of the Jacobin Club, the dispersal of the sans-culottes, and the renunciation of the Montagnard ideology. Yes, the revolutionaries realized that one day the revolution would come for them, which is exactly the situation that we are living through now. How woke is woke enough? There's no limit. Absolutely no limits. What was acceptable the day before yesterday is suddenly unacceptable, as we've seen with Dr. Seuss, that, oh, yes, everyone agrees now that Dr. Seuss, or at least 6 of his books, are horrifying and must never be printed again. Now, I'm going to talk about transgenderism here, and this is a distressing subject, and I'll try to make this as good taste as I can, but it's going to be rather difficult. I used to write for the National Catholic Register, and I was once assigned a story about, I think it was in Maryland, that gay organizations were demanding an end to the police policy of arresting men having sex at public conveniences along the highway. And they argued that this was part of their tradition, and for the police to arrest people for having sex at public conveniences was an example of homophobia. My editor at the time said that, there's a problem with stories like this, that if one doesn't describe what homosexuals get up to on a regular basis, then when pieces are written against their agenda, the readership will say, what's the problem? These people are just like us, virtually normal, as Andrew Sullivan would say. If one gets explicit, then there are typically 2 reactions from the readers. One, disbelief. No, this is impossible. No one would act like that. And second, cancellation of subscriptions. We don't pay good money to bring filth into our home. So it's a hard line to straddle. But let's see, Jazz Jennings. I think everyone knows who this person is. As a child, it was a 7-year-old, Jazz Jennings, was interviewed by Barbara Walters, I believe it was. And this was an example, apparently, of misgendered at birth. And Jazz became more and more famous, and eventually got a TV show called I Am Jazz, which ran for 6 seasons on the TLC network. And let's see, what were the reviews? Critic Brian Lowry of Variety praised I Am Jazz, calling it a sensitively constructed series in an admirable departure for the attention-seeking network. Simply told and heartfelt, the show should add a welcome dimension to the education process, capturing the challenges associated with sexual identity at such a vulnerable age. James Poniwozik, in his review for Time magazine, stated that the reality show airing on the same network that recently pulled 19 Kids and Counting off the air feels like a change of an era. I Am Jazz is an engaging story of a teen girl who has transitioned, but it is also the story of everyone else transitioning. Mark Silver of the Washington Post wrote about the boom of transgender-themed shows on TV, including Caitlyn Jenner's upcoming reality show, I Am Kate, which will surely attract more viewers because of Jenner's fame. It's too soon to say how Jazz will fare, but with her humor and honesty, she's a tough act for Caitlyn Jenner to follow. Jazz Jennings, I don't know, has this worked out for her? In an interview published in the April 11, 2018 People, Jennings revealed that per her surgeon's instructions, she had lost at least 30 pounds in order to have gender confirmation surgery, which was scheduled for June 20th, 2018. While the surgery was successful, Jennings suffered complications that required another follow-up procedure. And I can't say that I follow Jazz Jennings all that closely, but I gather it's been a, rather miserable journey for her. I saw a recent picture of this person, and Jazz Jennings is now close to being morbidly obese. Perhaps she is on some of the same drugs as Freddie DeBoer. We also have the phenomenon of Desmond is Amazing, who was, a 10-year-old drag queen, and which led to the edifying spectacle of Desmond prancing around on a stage in a gay bar while the patrons threw dollar bills at him. This is the way we live now. There was a tweet from Label-Free Brands, February 28th, which went viral, called Sex Life Gone Bad After Sexual Reassignment Surgery. A woman asked for advice about difficulties with her trans partner following genital surgery. She needs to pop a Xanax before sex, gags from the smell, and got hit with a bloody dilator when she cried. And she is so apologetic about it all. She begins, and again, I'll try to keep this as good taste as I can. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. I don't mean to sound rude. This is what from My Partner is Trans, or alternately, Amanda Quantum. I don't mean to sound rude. TMI follows probably. Content warning for sexual discussion. I'm a bisexual cis woman. My partner, AMAB, I don't know what that means, and I got married 7 years ago. She came out as trans the next year, and I was fine with it because, hey, gender has never mattered to me. And as we'd already decided on not having any children, and I'd gotten a tubal ligation, most of the usual problems people run into, like not being attracted to your partner post-transition due to being heterosexual, or being, understandably, if you want kids, upset about not being able to have any kids or plan ahead for pregnancy, didn't happen for us. We fast-tracked her transition like she insisted, and she was covered by insurance, so it went smoothly enough. Estrogen brought about interesting changes in our sex life, but I was also not a huge fan of penetration, did nothing for me. So again, the erectile dysfunction she was experiencing on and off was not an issue to us. She didn't require breast implants, as she did have some tissue growth, and push-up bras do the rest. I'm pretty flat myself. Amanda Quantum continues. Last March, she ended up going under the knife for the gender confirmation surgery. I was worried sick because it is a major surgery, but nothing seemed off the first few weeks. She was in copious pain, barely able to function without Demerol, and it hurt me to see her suffer. But I'd done her research, and I stuck through, and after all, I wasn't the one in pain. The bandages finally came off, and she was horrified by how swollen and gruesome everything looked, but the doctor assured her it would heal. I was worried, but I knew how long surgeries take to heal. Dilation had to start pretty quick, and she was in so much pain during those sessions that I couldn't bring myself to do it at first. It hurt me to hurt her because she couldn't dilate by herself due to the pain, and I felt like a rapist. At one point, she broke down crying, and so they're both crying, and the cis woman gets hit in the face with a plastic dilator. There was a mild scare in the middle of her recovery when the stitches on her labia kind of dissolved, but the surgeon again reassured both of us that that was normal. I'm going to paraphrase the rest of this because it is so disgusting. But okay, so they decide to have sex, and the woman, the cis woman, cannot hack it because it is so disgusting. And she comes to the conclusion that the person who had had the sexual reassignment surgery is actually infected, has been gifted with a permanent infection. And so in order to have sex, well, she doesn't want to anymore. She needs to take Xanax in order to zonk herself out so that she doesn't actually become physically sick. She concludes, I'm genuinely don't know what to do. I can't even bring I don't want to mention that. Yes, and I'm terrified my partner is going to die. I don't know how to approach this. I don't know what to do. And most of all, I want to know if she does have an infection that the surgeon refuses to acknowledge. I'm sorry for the long rant. I'm at my wits' end. And I was directed to a page on Poll, transgender surgery horror stories. And yes, there are a great many of these. It goes on and on and on. I will spare you, but I'll mention that one of the doctors who was interviewed in Abigail Schreier's book about female to male transsexualism said that given what we know about the risks, the complications, the suicides and all the rest of it, that he was now of the opinion that the medical profession should not engage in this practice, that it would be unethical for them to do so. But this is a very much a minority position. And now we see that exceedingly large numbers of Zoomers, more women than men, identify themselves as trans. And Schreier reports in the book that these people are getting their medical advice from YouTube and Tumblr, or their friends who are bullying them into it with the full connivance of the schools, both public and private. This is a horrifying scandal, but we are told exactly the opposite, that these people are brave and wonderful. Oh, that they belong to a sparkle family now. Yes, that's what they actually call it. And they need to be praised. In fact, there's the demand that these people be praised. And when Senator Rand Paul went after Dr. Rachel Levine at that person's confirmation hearing, Rachel Levine was misgendered at birth. He referred to mutilation, and the media was absolutely horrified. How dare you speak about this? So I'm just, I'm wondering. Abigail Schreier says that she regards this as a panic, a mass panic. And they say that it's always darkest before the dawn, but I really see no indication that there's going to be a reversal anytime soon, that we're going to get our Thermidorian reaction. I'm comforted by the thought that, systems continue until they stop, as Herbert Stein says, and that the system that we're living in now is clearly unsustainable. But with the whole weight of the elite behind it, I suppose this unsustainable system could be propped up for quite a long time. Now let's look at the chat. Hello to Palcasso88, Dan, to Professor Paul, who will be our Napoleon. Ricardo Williams says the difference between the American and British empires is that only the British were self-aware of their empire. Matthew Gubbins says no one is coming to save us. Ricardo Williams asks, where is Chad Chadson? That's the moderator of the chat. Glib Medley, yes, yes, we are. I feel so sorry for these children, how such a thing could be actually, permitted. These hormone treatments, how minors could be permitted to do this is absolutely shocking to me. Palpicasso88 says TLC is the circus freak show of the 21st century. Little people trans, 600-pound fat people, etc. There's Chad Chadson. Thank you for your work. G's Heastal says, we don't let kids drink or sign contracts, but we're to expect a kid can handle the decision of sex reassignment. It is so troubling and will haunt our society in years to come. I don't know. The medical profession used to perform a lot of lobotomies. And then they decided that this mutilation of the brain was not a good idea. But I don't recall the medical profession becoming any less pompous as a result of this. Kevin is single-handedly making Jim Kunstler relevant. I don't know. I've been reading Kunstler for, about 15 years or whatever. I've learned a lot from him. Okay. Well, I did warn you. I did warn you at the beginning that this was going to be troublesome. KMG says, Jim Bowden, I note that every stream you do, the wires on the floor are always exactly in the same position. Are you in a hotel room, or is your background a picture of a hotel room? It is a hotel room. Yes. British American says, Thermidor, I'm still waiting for the police to rebel en masse, but then I realized they probably can't forego those fat pensions they are due. I read that about Iran, says Steve. They punish adults, but we mutilate children and call it love. We had no business lecturing any country about human rights. Rudy Giuliani's daughter is in the news. This is from Emily Smith at the New York Post. Rudy Giuliani's daughter has opened up about her love of threesomes, saying three-way sex has made her a better person. In a piece for Vanity Fair titled A Unicorn's Tale, Three-Way Sex with Couples Has Made Me a Better Person, his Honor's daughter, Carolyn Rose Giuliani, openly discusses her sexual escapades with other couples. The piece, which opens with the words, I'm not going to read that. Carolyn, the 32-year-old daughter of Rudy Giuliani and Donna Hanover, writes, I had known some time I was at least bisexual, but had barely explored that side of my sexuality. I knew I wanted to experience new dynamics. After signing up for a dating site for unicorns, women who agree to have sex with couples, Carolyn writes, one woman I chatted with mentioned she was looking for someone to dominate her but be submissive to her boyfriend. Yes, the way we live now. And Carolyn said, I'm typically more sexually submissive, but as we are texting, which quickly turned into sexting, I tried on this authoritative sexual persona. I was pleased to discover that, having been submissive myself, finding the language to turn Isabella on came naturally to me. You remember when Vanity Fair was a respectable publication? After meeting the couple in a bar, she describes in detailed literature, we went back to their place. At one point, Oliver and I had sex while Isabella watched actively. She was a cuck queen, which is a woman who enjoys role-playing humiliation this way. Carolyn concludes that after the experience, she identifies as pansexual and admitting she has battled anxiety and depression her entire life. There's a shocker. She writes, the incredible moments of connection and transformation I've shared with those couples reminds me that my expansive mind is a gift. Carolyn is already a rebel in the Giuliani clan, having said that despite her father's role as attorney for Donald Trump, she would vote for President Biden. Rudy Giuliani was not immediately available for comment. And there's a picture of the young lady here who was wearing a T-shirt for John Ossoff, the newly minted senator from Georgia. What do they expect Dad to say? That he's fully on board with his daughter's decisions, and that what choice is the most important thing, and her happiness is all that matters? I mean, that's what he would be expected to say. Oh, as listeners to this live stream know, I am not a fan of Governor Andrew Cuomo, Governor Death of New York. But this pile-on, which is happening now, me too, yes. And as in, me too, me too, me too, look at me. Andrew Cuomo, this is again from the New York Post, Andrew Cuomo accuser says she believes governor was propositioning her for sex. This is by Bruce Golding. A former aide says Governor Andrew Cuomo was trying to sleep with me during a one-on-one meeting in his Albany office last year, with the 25-year-old adding that he implied to me that I was old enough for him and he was lonely. Charlotte Bennett made these stunning comments in an interview that aired Thursday night on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, saying that her then boss, Cuomo, now 63, asked probing questions about her sex life when they were alone together on June 5th. I thought, he's trying to sleep with me. The governor's trying to sleep with me, and I'm deeply uncomfortable, and I have to get out of this room as soon as possible. What made you think he was trying to sleep with you? O'Donnell asked. Without explicitly saying it, he implied to me that I was old enough for him and he was lonely, Bennett said. A second portion of the interview is set to air Friday on CBS This Morning, and O'Donnell previewed some of that during an appearance on the local CBS 2 News at 5. O'Donnell said Bennett says Governor Cuomo is, in her words, a textbook abuser, and even uses words like she was groomed for this relationship. Apparently, grooming is a very broad term now. At one point in Thursday's segment, O'Donnell asked Bennett if Cuomo was likely emboldened by all the national attention he got from his televised coroner's briefings. Absolutely. I think he felt like he was untouchable in a lot of ways, she answered. Okay. The disturbing discussion allegedly took place after Bennett, then an executive assistant to the governor, was called into Cuomo's office to take dictation, and he told her to turn off the recorder. During an earlier May 15th conversation, Bennett recalled, Cuomo seemed fixated on her history of surviving sexual assault. So he goes, you were raped and abused and assaulted, she said. Cuomo also brought the subject up again on June 5th. He asked if I had trouble enjoying being with someone because of my trauma. When O'Donnell said that seems highly inappropriate, Bennett agreed. Yeah, the governor asked me if I was sensitive to intimacy, she said. In his office, O'Donnell asked. Yes, during the workday. O'Donnell told Bennett, people will watch this and say, why didn't you get up and leave? Bennett rejected the notion that she misinterpreted what Cuomo was saying to her. I didn't feel like I had a choice, she said. And there's a picture of the young woman here. She's quite an attractive redhead. But here's what I don't understand. So apparently, Andrew Cuomo was using his knowledge of this woman, Bennett, having previously been raped, as a sort of an entree to his grooming. How would he have known about that? Was it in her CV? Do women do that now? No. The only reason that Cuomo would have known that this woman said that she was raped is because she told him that. Now, why would she do that? Is it to give herself a victim status such that she becomes untouchable herself. I'm just completely at a loss to understand that. And in the category, what is it you'd say you do here? That's from Office Space. This is from the Daily Mail. Emer Scully, Deloitte diversity champion 49 quits role amid bullying probe. Self-styled Alphabet People ally steps down as accounting giant investigates her aggressive communication methods. Exclusive, Dimple Agarwal. This woman is called Dimple, and she is 49 years old, which means that she was born in what, 1972? Am I really supposed to believe that children were given the name Dimple in 1972? It seems fairly obvious to me that she changed her name as an adult to Dimple because, you know, a name like that is really going to get you places in the business world. Richard Houston, UK CEO for Deloitte, told the Mail, after 2 years on the executive and making a significant contribution to the firm's people and purpose agenda, Dimple will be stepping down from her leadership roles. We're grateful for what she's achieved during her tenure. Ms. Agarwal is still thought to work for the firm, but is currently out of office, according to an automated email response. She was a UK deputy chief executive, managing partner of the firm's People and Purposes group, and listed herself on LinkedIn as an Alphabet People ally for Deloitte Globe and a race ally for Deloitte's multicultural network. She faces allegations from staff that she communicated aggressively. Staff also accused her of telling colleagues to attend extremely early morning meetings, according to claims first made in the Daily Telegraph. In 2019, Agarwal, in her role in Deloitte's People and Purposes group, announced the firm would double the paid leave period for non-birthing parents. The company, which employs around 20,000 people in the UK, had previously given staff 2 weeks paid paternity leave, but doubled it to 4. The decision came amid what bosses described as a disappointingly low take-up of paternity leave. Yeah, can't imagine why that would be. Speaking at the time, Agarwal said the move followed research by the firm, which found that increasing numbers of working fathers between the age of 24 and 40 were actively involved in day-to-day parenting. However, she said that this wasn't necessarily reflected in support from their employers. In its annual report in October, Deloitte announced partners in the UK were set for a 17% pay cut because of the COVID-19 pandemic's impact. In the same report, the company also offered up details of the company's ethnicity pay gap. There were minimal increases on the mean and median hourly pay gap figures. Okay. However, Agarwal, who reportedly joined Deloitte in 2004, said this was expected due to its efforts to recruit a more diverse workforce, leading to an increase in the proportion of our colleagues from ethnic minorities at our more junior levels. Last year, a report revealed just 11 of the almost 3,000 equity partners at the Big Four accountancy firms are Black. At the time of the report, in June last year, Deloitte had 1 Black equity partner, EY and KPMG had 2 each, while PwC had 6. In response, Agarwal told the Telegraph, "We have a lot to do and much further to go." So, at the end of reading this story, I still have no idea whatsoever what Dimple did for a living. Is she even an accountant? Is that necessary to be employed at a Deloitte? Here's a shock horror story from The Guardian. The misogynist incel movement is spreading. Should it be classified as a terror threat? You know, when the media frames stories, made up stories like this in such a manner, what they are telling you is they are demanding that the incel movement should be classified as a terror threat, which probably means that soon enough it will be. As attacks linked to the misogynist incel movement mounted in recent years, authorities around the world have begun to treat the ideology as a more serious terrorism threat. Since 2014, men who call themselves involuntary celibates and blame women for their own lack of sexual and social status have carried out mass killings in California, Florida, and Toronto. On Wednesday, a judge in Canada delivered a guilty verdict for the perpetrator of the 2018 Toronto van attack, which left 10 people dead and 16 injured, the deadliest incident linked to the Incel movement. Yes, the accused pleaded autism or being on the spectrum as a defense, and I'm pleased to see that the judge did not buy that. In her verdict, the judge found that the attacker's resentment towards women was one among several motivating factors, but experts warn that such incidents are becoming more frequent and that the ideology behind them is spreading internationally. 2020 saw a string of incel-related incidents, including a machete attack at a Toronto massage parlor, a shooting at an Arizona mall, which injured 3 people, a man who blew up his own hand with explosives in Virginia, and a New York man charged by federal prosecutors for targeting a couple with violent threats. While only one of those attacks was fatal, the fact that those incidents weren't worse is more luck than good counter-terrorism, says Jacob Ware, a terrorism researcher who studies the Incel movement. 2020 was a bad year for Incel violence. There are also signs that the ideology is spreading beyond North America. In the UK, at least 2 recent terror trials included discussion of Incel ideas as a motivation. I remember, I think it was back in the 90s, I read this piece in Forbes by Rich Karlsgaard, I think that's his name, talking about the World Wide Web, was still fairly new then, that he predicted that this would lead to a rise in virtual communities, and he was absolutely correct. But he also noted that a great many of these communities will be nasty ones, people reinforcing their nastiness. Now, you know the old joke about the murderer. He was a quiet man, kept to himself. I suspect that if you look at killings, mass killings, over the years, going back decades or even hundreds of years, you will find a great many of them were perpetrated by men who couldn't get or keep a woman, but they didn't call themselves incels then. But now they are a community, and apparently they are an ideology and a terror threat. Let's have a look at, let's go back to the chat before I talk a little more about the internet. Steve says, Deloitte is huge. They can afford diversity hires to shield against accusations of racism. Smaller companies, not so fortunate. Glib Medley says, if you ain't getting any, you're going to get it. Hikma Warrior says, many incels are quite reasonable. I don't know. You know, it's a shameful thing to admit that you're a man who cannot get a woman. As a general principle, any man, no matter how old or ugly or, bad with people, can find a woman. I mean, it's really not that hard. Elliot Rodger, the Supreme Gentleman, complained, he complained that women, were ignoring him. There was some sort of conspiracy. In his own words, he never once in his life approached a woman. Apparently, I guess, dad wasn't around when he was growing up, and I guess he didn't have a father to teach him things like that. That's assuming that fathers actually teach things like that nowadays. Halper says, if QAnon and the incels join forces, there will be no stopping them. Roulette Crack says, I think they attacked 20 female judges in Afghanistan. Is it those incels they are talking about? I am guessing not. Well, Muslim societies have a problem. They have polygamy. So the alpha males grab all the women, and there's not a lot left for everyone else. It's the Pareto distribution, 80-20 and 20-80. And of course, in Muslim countries, You're not allowed to drown your sorrows in alcohol. So I think that explains a lot of the endemic violence. Lamprey Mill says, Kevin, I wrote an article titled In Celebration on the American Sun. Please check it out. I will. I think I've already talked about this on the show. That was, about 3 weeks ago or something? Matthew Gubbins says KMG better get a cardboard cutout of Zooey Deschanel so he doesn't get swatted. No. Hickman Warrior says only a world war would cleanse society of this filth. Okay. Steve says diversity and inclusion roles in departments of private business are complete deadweight that add no value. No, and I suspect that they. It's not just that this is dead weight. I think that they encourage a culture where everyone is searching for micro aggressions. Of course, life, and especially office life, being little more than a concatenation of micro aggressions. Well, you can see where this leads. I want to talk about going solo. A fellow called Spandrel was kicked off the internet. This is a post from yesterday. So 2 days ago, he writes, I was just banned from Twitter. They didn't give me a reason nor a way to restore my account. I did file an appeal and maybe I get lucky, but I doubt it. My ban was part of a massive purge of thousands of accounts, many of them much milder than myself. I won't register a new account. And then he says some things about Jack Dorsey, which I will not repeat. Screw his CIA handlers, his Saudi investors, and his Troon moderators. The Twitter link at the nav bar is gone, and good riddance. I quit Google in 2011. I quit Facebook in 2012. It's taken a while now, but I'm completely out of redacted word social media. Feels good, man. I'm not angry at losing a platform to broadcast my thoughts. I've had a blog for far longer than I've been on Twitter, and this is my blog, my territory. It is mine. I moved off WordPress years ago when I saw all this coming. This is my house now. I built it. I wrote the code it runs on, the post CMS, the comment system, everything. I host it myself in a neutral jurisdiction. Nobody can take it away from me. I write what I want, edit my content as I will, moderate the comments at my pleasure. And that's how it should be. Spandrel writes, I'm a publisher, and a publisher should take care to not be subject to the will of anyone else. This much should be obvious. It's my content. I'm not angry at all at my tweets going away. Most of what I did on Twitter was shit posting, the equivalent of just shit talking with the boys at a red light district bar while laughing at the passing hookers. Often it was literally that. I deleted all my own tweets every few weeks or so. For me, it was a place for ephemeral musings. I didn't keep backups. I find it quite odd that people are fine with everything coming out of their brains after 3 beers remaining permanently in public on the internet. What I'm quite angry about is that I did follow about 1,000 people myself, and now I can't access that content. I mean, I'm not stupid. I did keep a backup of my follows and my followers. I already have them set up RSS feed made with Knitter. That took some work, though. And I should have done it earlier, to be fair. Same with my followers, thousands of them. I have a list. I can contact them again, but it's a huge hassle. And some of them are gone, perhaps forever. It shouldn't be like this. We don't have to live like this. We can do better, and we will do better. As my readers know, I saw all of this coming, and since Twitter banned Donald Trump, I've been actively preparing for my eventual expulsion. There's many options out there, plenty of Twitter clones, Gab, the Fediverse. Good people have offered to help me move to many platforms, and I thank them for that, but I won't. We don't need another Twitter. We need to change the whole damn system. We don't need a vulnerable, centralized platform just to say based and paste a URL and have people read it. We need to take back the internet. Most internet applications today are built as a client-server system. A computer somewhere serves code to other computers who consume it. The code server computer is the server, and the code receiver is a client. But that's completely incidental to how the internet works. The server and the client are pretty much the same sort of computer, might be running the same operating system for all we know. The internet, TCP/IP at its base, is a peer-to-peer system. Computers send packets to other computers. That's it. All computers are the same as far as the network is concerned. The internet is just a pipe. It doesn't care who or what is funneling stuff into it. As a publisher with a blog or a microblogging feed, you are literally serving content. You are writing stuff and broadcasting it on the internet. You, little shitlord on Twitter, you are a server. You should be serving your content yourself. That's what this blog does. I have a server and I serve you my writing in the form of HTML, CSS, JS code. Your browsers are clients which receive the code I serve, but that's not how Twitter works. On Twitter, you're just some pansy who has to register, give them your email and cell phone number. Then you upload your content through a client, a Twitter mobile app or their web app, and then Twitter, at their leisure and discretion, i.e. hiding your content if you like a Trump tweet, or outright banning you for undermining confidence in the stability of the NATO alliance. That is actually happening. Serve your content on the internet. Twitter also keeps lists of your followers, your own reading feed, and your DMs, and they can dispose of them at their complete leisure. Why are we doing this? Why can't we just serve our content directly on the internet? Well, there's an obvious reason. It's hard. This blog took some effort to put online. It also costs me money. Twitter is easy to set up and it's free. It's a fact that people are dumb, lazy, and cheap, and so Twitter gets to ban them for undermining confidence in the stability of the NATO alliance. And again, that is not a joke. It's actually happening. So he talks about Urbit. It's a personal server, plain and simple. It is designed for the ground up to be a completely programmable server, which belongs to you forever with a permanent ID system that can't ever disappear, be destroyed, or taken away from you. And you can do anything you want with it. Running Urbit as of today isn't exactly easy, but it's not that hard, provided you're the sort of person who can type without looking at the keyboard. And it's getting easier every day. Even if you're just not good with computers, by the end of this year at the latest, you will be able to pay people to run a server for you for the cost of a couple of drinks, or you can buy hardware to run it in the privacy of your home. I've been in Urbit for months now. I host a big group there with hundreds of smart and based people being able to chat, write posts, or share links in complete freedom. I serve that group myself from my computer, and it is glorious. That is good news, and I'm very glad to see it. Obviously, those of us who are on the losing side of the Great Divide are going to have our own platforms for everything, including now books, because otherwise it will all be taken away from us. Let's go to the chat. Ashley Bravo says Pareto 80-20 principle in human class societies. Apparently, this is what they're getting on the dating sites like Tinder, with 20% of the men getting 80% of the women and 80% of the men getting 20% of the women. Banking too, says Teddy Saginaw. Yeah. Ryan Landry said that in his column this morning that some states like Oklahoma and Montana are getting a little uppity on the transgender athletes situation. And how will the federal government punish them? Tanks? No, bad optics there. One suggestion would be to kick them off the SWIFT system. So suddenly they don't have access to money any longer. He style says, your site, your rules until Visa and MasterCard disapprove. Ashi Bravo says, I was reading a Twitter thread where trans women and cis women cam girls were harshly insulting each other over what seemed to be a fight over market share. Wasn't the Orlando disco attack done by an Afghan incel? I thought that the fellow who shot that nightclub up was married. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. Glib Medley says Spandrell is best known for coining the term bio-Leninism. Okay, I am going to talk about Pareto now. From James Burnham's book, The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. Residues and derivatives. Burnham begins, words are perhaps the most distinctive trait of human beings. If man is only in a small degree a rational animal, he is preeminently a verbal animal. Words, spoken or written, are associated with most of his activities, and in particular, with those activities that are of social and political significance. After finishing his discussion of non-logical conduct in general, Pareto restricts himself to those non-logical actions which include or are associated with words. Everyone will recognize that nearly all of the nonverbal conduct, such as is found in animals or in the purely instinctive behavior of human beings, is also non-logical. The peculiar and deceptive problems arise in connection with conduct which is verbal, but at the same time non-logical. Pareto examines a vast number of examples of this sort of conduct taken from many times and cultures. From this examination, Pareto concludes that two quite different phases may be discovered. There is, he says, a fairly small number of relatively constant factors or nuclei which change little or not at all from age to age or from culture to culture. These constant factors he calls residues. Along with these, there are other factors which are variable, change rapidly, and are different from age to age and nation to nation. These variable factors he calls derivations. Let us illustrate the distinction by examples. Pareto records a long list of non-logical practices in many tribes, groups, and nations, which have as their ostensible purpose the control of weather conditions. Sometimes the practice is to sacrifice a bull or a cock or a goat, sometimes to manipulate certain material objects, sometimes to repeat certain formulas. The most extreme concrete differences are observable. Often, along with the practice, there is a theory which supposedly explains why the practice is able to affect the weather, because a god is thereby propitiated or something of the sort. These varying concrete practices, together with the explanatory theories, are all derivations. However, among the variables, there is a common nucleus, the feeling that by means of some manipulation or another, it is possible to control the weather. Once this common nucleus is understood, it is seen to be the same that is manifested in many other types of activities besides those related to weather control. Activities through which men bring together into a combination two or more elements of whatever kind and for whatever supposed purpose or with no purpose at all. This nucleus, common to all of this great area of actions, is the residue, and in this case what Pareto calls the residue of combinations. Again, we find in all ages a great variety of verbalized activities connected with the sex impulse. Sometimes these take the form of pornographic literature and stories, sometimes of denunciations of sexual license, of asceticism or pruriency, sometimes of strict or licentious theories about proper sexual relations, sometimes of ideas about censorship, sometimes of religious or moral allegories. Throughout all these manifold derivations, nevertheless, runs the common sex nucleus, remarkably stable at all periods, changing style and mode, but always cropping up in some new expression when an old disappears or is suppressed. This common sex nucleus is therefore also a residue. Or again, we find that everywhere and at all times, men believe in the objective reality and persistence of entities like gods or spirits or the state or progress or justice or freedom or humanity or the proletariat or the law. The names and special personalities of the entities change, sometimes rather quickly. So also do the theories that explain the entities, religions and philosophies and moralities. The names and special features in the theories are derivations, but always we find, however expressed, this common belief in the reality of such entities, so that here too we have a residue, the residue of the persistence of abstractions. The term residue then means simply the stable common element which we may discover in social actions, the nucleus which is left over, hence perhaps Pareto's choice of the word residue, when the variable elements are stripped away. It must be stressed that for Pareto, residue is a sociological, not a psychological or biological term. Residues are discovered not by psychological or biological research, but by comparing and analyzing huge numbers of social actions. Presumably, a residue corresponds to some fairly permanent human impulse or instinct, or as Pareto more often calls it, sentiment. However, Pareto is not primarily interested in where residues come from, but in the fact that social actions may be analyzed in terms of them. Just give me a second here. Yes. Our detailed examination of one theory or another has in any case led to our perceiving that theories in the concrete may be divided into at least two elements, one of which is more stable than the other. Pareto is not always strict about these distinctions and sometimes uses terms like sentiment or instinct where he should say residue. No great harm need result, since from a rough common sense point of view, they are interchangeable. However, it is important to keep them theoretically distinct and to insist that a residue is a social and not a psychological term in order to guard against the supposition that Pareto's social theories could be disproved by a psychological argument, by, for example, showing, if it could be shown, that an instinct theory of psychology is false. Pareto's theories, properly understood, do not depend upon any special psychological doctrine. Even if psychology says that men do not have any permanent instincts, it may still be true that there are certain permanent, or at least relatively constant, types of social activity. Analysis can, Pareto believes, show that there are a good many residues operative in social action. For convenience, he divides them into 6 main classes, though other divisions might be substituted without altering the main theory. And the classes are 1, instinct for combinations; 2, group persistences; 3, need of expressing sentiments by external acts; 4, residues connected with sociology; and 5, the integrity of the individual and his appurtenances; and 6, the sex residue. And I will discuss these in more detail on Monday. So, moving on, here's a piece from Douglas Murray in Unheard called "Why is the Woke Mob So Scared?" Whenever a person is canceled or no platformed, a public battle is inevitably waged. On one side, there are those who uphold the value of free speech. On the others, those who insist free speech depends on what is being said, or believe the whole debate is some kind of smokescreen for smuggling extremist ideas into society. What goes unnoticed, however, is that there is a pattern to these eruptions. The recent cancellation of Professor Gregory Clark at the University of Glasgow is a case in point. Yesterday, it was reported that Clark, a professor at economics at the University of California and visiting professor at the London School of Economics, was last week unable to give a lecture in Glasgow because of its title, "For Whom the Bell Curve Tolls, a Lineage of 400,000 Individuals, 1750 to 2020, Shows Genetics Determines Most Social Outcomes." The reference was to John Donne's poem, later appropriated by Ernest Hemingway. That was not the problem. The allusion to the work of Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein clearly was. And The Bell Curve, of course, was a book that came out in 1994 and was promoted by the New Republic, and I guess this cost Andrew Sullivan his job. And it was much praised. But then it was determined universally that this is a demon work and must not even be mentioned. Though its critics tend not to have read the work, they insist that it not only argues for but positively rejoices in the idea that intelligence is largely determined by a person's race. It is a misunderstanding that has rumbled for over a quarter of a century, and every discussion of the book usually ends in acrimony. And so when Professor Clark hinted at the work in his lecture's title, the university asked him to change it. In some ways, this was to be expected. The University of Glasgow had recently published a new report titled "Understanding Racism: Transforming University Cultures," which sets out an action plan to make the university an inclusive space for all. As Clark himself puts it, my talk was regarded as a provocation in this situation. I had a half-hour Zoom meeting with the dean. He would reschedule the talk if I agreed to change the paper title to not have any reference to bell curve. I have refused. As soon as the disagreement was publicized, the online mob did what it always does and swiftly became an expert on a person previously unknown to them. Clark was slandered, just like Noah Carl and other academics before him, as a eugenicist, with one critic suggesting that the talk was due to be a thinly disguised piece of book promotion by an economist who manipulates and misrepresents genetics to advance his pseudo-scientific opinions. Well, this opinion is not unique to me, but we see how people are practicing eugenics in their personal lives more than they ever have before in a process known as assortative mating. No, one couldn't possibly, have a wife or, have a girlfriend who bears your children, if she is not as smart as you are, and vice versa. So these people who decry eugenics, well, strangely enough, they don't follow that when it comes to their own actions. Uh, let's see. Murray concludes, Professor Clark's cancellation reveals there is also deeper discussion that we need to have, one that questions what our attitude should be towards the situation we are born into. The ethos of our era holds that if we organize society well enough, everyone can be whatever they like. And ultimately, the fact that the counterposition, that we are all to some extent dictated by factors outside of our control, is so little heard, is an ominous sign. For if it is false, then we need not be troubled by it. But if it is true, surely it is better that we find out now, while some semblance of rational discussion is still possible. Yes. If we organize society well enough, everyone can be whatever they like. Well, that is demonstrably insane, but apparently no matter. We'll just pretend. Oh, let's talk about Baltimore. Yes. This is a very amusing story. This is from Fox 5 News in Baltimore. City student passes 3 classes in 4 years, ranks near top half of class with 0.13 grade point average. A shocking discovery out of a Baltimore City high school where Project Baltimore has found hundreds of students are failing. It's a school where a student who passed 3 classes in 4 years ranks near the top of his class with a 0.13 GPA. Tiffany France thought her son would receive his diploma this coming June. But after 4 years of high school, France just learned her 17-year-old must start over. He's been moved back to 9th grade. He's stressed, and I am too. I told him I'm probably going to start crying. I don't know what to do for him, France said. Why would he do 3 more years in school? He didn't fail. The school failed him. The school failed at their job. They failed. That's the problem here. They failed. He didn't deserve that. You note this use of words as a kind of totem, an incantation. They failed. This woman thinks that if she repeats this often enough, it will make it true. Another example of our return to magical thinking. Francis' son attends Augusta Fells Savage Institute of Visual Arts in West Baltimore. His transcripts show he's passed just 3 classes in 4 years, earning 2.5 credits, placing him in 9th grade. But France says she didn't know that until February. She has 3 children and works 3 jobs. She thought her oldest son was doing well because even though he failed most of his classes, he was being promoted. His transcripts show he failed Spanish 1 and Algebra 1, but was promoted to Spanish 2 and Algebra 2. He also failed English 2, but was passed on to English 3. I'm just assuming that if you are passing, that you have the proper things to go to the next grade, and the right grades, you have the right credits. As we dig deeper into her son's records, we can see that in his first 3 years at Augusta Fells, he failed 22 classes and was late or absent 272 days. But in those 3 years, only one teacher requested a parent conference, which France says never happened. No one from the school told France her son was failing and not going to class. In his 4 years at Augusta Fells, France's son earned a GPA, again, of 0.13. He only passed 3 classes, but his transcript show his class rank is 62 out of 120. This means nearly half of his classmates, 58 of them, have a 0.13 grade point average or lower. He's a good kid. He didn't deserve that. Where's the mentors? Where's the help for him? I hate that this is happening to my child, said emotional France. Project Baltimore talked with a city schools administrator who works inside North Avenue, but asked not to be identified for fear of retaliation. That administrator says the school system absolutely failed Francis' son. The administrator said that the city schools failed because it has protocols and interventions set up to help students who are falling behind or have low attendance. In Francis' son case, they didn't happen. Dr. Sonia Santelises was the city school's CEO 4 years ago when Francis' son was a freshman, but she will not interview with Fox 45 News. Instead, we received a 2-page statement which explains what should happen when a student is chronically absent or failing. Okay. I read some years ago that the average IQ, this is based on test results, that the average IQ of blacks in Baltimore is about, I think, 71. Now, if this is true, and it would appear to be so, how much academically could one expect from such children? Not much. Now, the assumption that these Baltimore children are going to end up in college, in university, seems to me to be extremely misguided one. Baltimore spends about $15,000 per year per student. Of course, I don't have direct evidence of this, but given what I've seen of the typical conditions in black-dominated classrooms in America, it's remarkable that anyone learns anything. There is no discipline whatsoever. And of course, the Obama administration moved to sanction schools which discipline black students more than non-black students. So you have a situation where people are talking, yelling, running around, dancing, standing on their desks, throwing things at other people, singing, hurling insults, and the like. And it's impossible for a classroom to work unless certain, simple conditions obtain. That the students are expected to sit down, shut up, keep still, and speak only when they're spoken to. But apparently this is culturally oppressive. The purpose of schools now seems to be, that everyone's going to be a university graduate and therefore become a member of the elite, on the principle that anyone can do whatever they want. And this is simply not true. In other countries, there is an emphasis on practical education. And I think that this is something that we very much need in North America. We already have a surplus of elites, and building up a class of people who have useless degrees and are angry at the world because of it. It's simply not a good idea. Okay, what do we have in the chat? Right isn't working hard enough to leave this behind right now, says Quachalango. Ashi Bravo says everyone is going to grow up to be part of the PMC, professional managerial class. Quachalango again, Baltimore Magnet School valedictorian username available. Star Rover says virtually every U.S. public school is now graduating kids who are illiterate. It boosts funding to shovel illiterate kids out the door. What is it? I've seen a statistic that 56%, I think it was, of Detroit high school graduates are functionally illiterate. It's just, it's warehousing. Steve says there was a high school called Ballou Academy in Southeast DC, 100% grad rate on year, beautiful new campus. Turned out they were literally graduating kids who could not read. Yes, remember No Child Left Behind? Well, not all children are the same. And expecting all children to become academicians, again, is it's crazy. Star Rover says there are predominantly black Baltimore high schools in which 0 students meet the minimum math requirement for graduation. Okay. Let's talk about Joe Biden, who has not yet given a press conference, and the media is starting to get a little antsy about that. Biden won White House with put your dumb uncle in the basement strategy, new book says. President Biden won the White House because the coronavirus let him stay hidden in his basement, protecting his campaign from its biggest liability, the candidate himself, a new book says. The Biden camp ran partly on the strategy of you put your dumb uncle in the basement, referring to the Democratic candidate, according to Lucky, how Joe Biden barely won the presidency. This is by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. Didn't he received more votes than any other presidential candidate in history? What, 6 million more than Donald Trump, and supposedly barely won the presidency? It seems as if there might be something going on here. Even former President Obama initially refused to support his 78-year-old ex-vice president and friend, worried he could become a tragic-comic caricature of an aging politician having his last hurrah. Yes, Biden is described as a previous two-time loser who succeeded on his third try despite himself. And no one was more caught off guard than the Trump camp. The Tome says that in May, Trump watched Biden give a CNN interview and afterward asked top aide Kellyanne Conway, "What do you think?" Conway replied, "I think if we lose to him, we are pathetic." Trump laughed, says the book's authors. Until the COVID thing came, we were winning 400 electoral votes, a source familiar with Trump's internal numbers around February 2020 claimed to the authors. Yeah. How do you get a hopeless candidate elected? How about by creating mass hysteria about a disease and then claiming that it's all the incumbent's fault? Now, what Joe Biden could have done differently, what did he during the debate? Oh, I have a plan. I have a plan. What's your plan? What's your plan? Lockdowns? Well, that's really up to the states and the cities. The federal government doesn't have the power to do that. Waffle on about masks and double masks, say. In mid-March 2020, Biden's team converted the basement of his home in Wilmington, Delaware, into a makeshift studio for which he could safely issue statements. They used coronavirus as an excuse to keep him in the basement, and it was smart, a Trump advisor told the authors. Biden was able to hide his biggest weakness, which is himself, and he did it with an excuse that sounded responsible. But Biden's broadcast the night of the March 17th primaries was just bizarre, the book says. There was a hostage video quality to the broadcast. It was cloudy and dark. As he spoke, there was an ever so slight time delay, putting Biden's words out of sync with the movements of his mouth. This was the guy who would send Donald Trump to Mar-a-Lago for good. One Biden aide told the authors, "I cringed the entire time. He looked like he didn't know what he was doing." Okay. Old narrative. Optimistic, can-do American Joe Biden with a wealth of political experience and empathy. He defeated Donald Trump because America decided it was time for a change. No more negativity, no more nastiness, a return to hope and a better world for Americans and for all. And now we're being told that Biden is a doddering old fool who won the election only because of COVID-19. That is quite the narrative shift. This is from Nikki Schwab at the Daily Mail. Joe Biden tells NASA engineers that Indian Americans are, quote, taking over the country, unquote, as he thanks Perseverance team for their inspiring Mars landing. It's amazing. Indian descent Americans are taking over the country. You, my vice president, my speechwriter. Wait a minute. I thought Kamala Harris was black. I'm confused. You see, the way it's supposed to work is that you invite enough foreigners into your country, or they just, walk over the border, such that they can be said to be taking over the country. You're not supposed to talk about it, Joe. Similarly, what was it, a couple of years ago? Joe thanked American Jews for gay marriage, saying, yeah, it was you guys. You did it. You're not supposed to say that sort of thing out loud, Joe. We can land a rover on Mars. We can beat a pandemic, Biden said. And with science, hope, and vision, there's not a damn thing we can't do. as a country. Biden said that a head of state told him America's changed so much. They used to be so competent to do great things. And here they can't even deal with the coronavirus. Look at how badly organized they are. And of course, Canada, Britain, France, Germany, etc., they had no problems or hardly any problems with the coronavirus. So Biden says, America's image in the world, it matters because democracies have to demonstrate they can run as efficiently, and even more efficiency than autocracies. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America. There's a fatuous piece in Politico magazine called The Rise of the Biden Republicans, written by Zach Stanton, who should be ashamed of himself. See, he talks about Reagan Democrats. And of course, Reagan was a Democrat for many, many years. And he famously said, I didn't leave my party left me. So yes, the Reagan Democrats came about because a great many voters, particularly in Rust Belt states, came to the conclusion that the Democrats no longer spoke for them, that it was a party of, what was the tagline from 1972? Acid, amnesty, and abortion. That the Democrats no longer cared for working class people, that the Democrats were too radical. Joe Biden's administration has already proved itself to be the most radically left government in American history. But supposedly all of these people, who probably would have voted for Ronald Reagan, these Republicans, they just love Joe Biden. What utter tosh. And this is a very long story. I'll just summarize it, but I recommend it. It's from American Greatness by Pedro Gonzalez, called Grifting on a Dream. Former Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale might be a proxy for the America First movement and its betrayal. According to this story, Jared was in charge of everything, and nothing got approved without Jared's approval. And Brad Parscale was the face of Jared. And apparently something close to $500 million in contributions disappeared. Parscale was earning $15,000 a month, but he supposedly owned many millions of dollars of properties and cars and the like. And the Trump campaign, despite ostensibly being flush with money, didn't have money. It was constantly running short of money. Since Election Day, fundraising vehicles tied to Trump have pulled in more than $207 million in donations. It's an old story. Oh, this is funny. Puerto Rico, the 51st state. It's finally time. Once again, I'll mention it is a complete mystery to me why the United States did not give Puerto Rico its independence in, say, 1946, as the Philippines were given its independence. This is from the Miami Herald. Puerto Rico Governor Pedro Pierluisi traveled to Washington, D.C. this week to meet with White House officials and advocate for a new bill that charts a path towards statehood for the American territory. Why? Puerto Rico will be the first truly Hispanic state. Apparently there's no Hispanics in the United States. There hasn't been a huge increase in the number of Hispanics in the United States since 1965. Pierluisi took office January 2nd at a time when the island is facing multiple crises. The pandemic, multi-billion-dollar debt, a series of earthquakes still rattling the island, as well as ongoing recovery from Hurricane Maria. How many years ago was that? Which killed thousands and demolished critical infrastructure. So the governor argues that it's just not fair that Puerto Ricans can't vote for president and don't have representation in Congress. On the other hand, Puerto Ricans do not pay federal income tax. It seems like a pretty good deal to me. But his argument as to why Puerto Rico should be a state is that it's Hispanic. Yeah, okay. That's all he's got. That's really all he's got. Oh, isn't the United States going to have to, step in and pay an enormous amount of money to keep Puerto Rico afloat if it becomes a state? Oh, all the states who entered, after the first 13, they were all underperforming. Were they? Really? I guess we're supposed to believe that. Some Canadian news. I'll keep it short. From the Canadian press, Line 5, very different from Keystone XL, and Canada will fight hard for it, says Seamus O'Regan, who is the gay leprechaun cabinet minister from Newfoundland. The federal government won't let Michigan shut down the Line 5 pipeline, Canada's Natural Resources Minister said Thursday, as he dismissed opposition comparisons to the thwarted Keystone XL project. Seamus O'Regan sounded almost combative as he vowed to defend the 1,000-kilometer line, which bridges an environmentally sensitive part of the Great Lakes to link Wisconsin with refineries in Sarnia, Ontario. The Enbridge Inc. pipeline carries an estimated 540,000 daily barrels of oil and natural gas liquids and is vital to the energy and employment needs of Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec. How do they insert Alberta in there? Alberta has no shortage of oil and gas and does not need it from Sarnia, Ontario. This is an outright lie. In November, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer ordered Line 5 to be shut down by May, accusing Enbridge of violating the terms of the deal that allows the line to traverse the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac. Yes, so Keystone XL primarily benefits Alberta. So Biden says no go, and Canada makes some weak noises in response. But no, the pipeline, which benefits overwhelmingly Ontario and Quebec, that's a line we will not allow be crossed. And now you understand Canadian politics. Dr. Anthony Fauci says military members who opt out of COVID vaccine are inadvertently part of the problem. You're part of a solution to this outbreak, Fauci explained to a virtual audience during a town hall with Blue Star Families, a nonprofit dedicated to issues facing military families. Because by getting infected, even though you may not know it, you may be inadvertently transmitting the infection to someone else, even though you have no symptoms. In reality, like it or not, you're propagating this outbreak. So instead of being part of the solution, you are innocently and inadvertently being part of the problem by not getting vaccinated. You've got to think of your own health, which is really very important. Oh, thank you, doctor. But you've got to think about your societal obligation, including people close to you personally, as well as other members of families of other individuals. Last month, the Pentagon acknowledged that about 1/3 of U.S. military service members declined to take the voluntary coronavirus vaccine. And I don't see any reference to the racial aspect of this. As we know, not just in the United States, but in Canada and Britain, very large numbers of Black people have decided they do not want to take the virus for various reasons. And just give me a second here and we will move on. Oh, yes. Emily Peck. And who is Emily Peck when she's at home? She's a senior reporter for HuffPost, and she's Slate Money co-host. Okay. She tweets, wow, new jobs day analysis from NWLC. Over the past year, the retail sector has seen a net loss of 362,600 jobs, 98% of which belonged to women. I responded to her, perhaps women should have considered the consequences before they became the head cheerleaders for, and in many cases, the chief implementers of the sanitary dictatorship that wrecked society and smashed the economy. Somehow I don't think that Emily can put 2 and 2 together in this case to make 4. And here's a piece that I quite liked from the Neo-Ciceronian Times, titled "Weaponizing Midwits in the COVID-19 War on Civil Society." The United States of America is a deeply divided society, as basically any observer can tell. It's an understatement to say that we have essentially no social cohesion left. Decades of pretending that diversity is our strength has led to a racially and ethnically divided society made up of heritage Americans on one side and a whole host of economic parasites and ethno-narcissistic minorities on the other. Added to this is the widening economic divide created by open immigration and economic centralization of wealth into the hands of an oligarchy of economically unproductive but politically powerful elite factions. Topping it all off is a woke political ideology that is capable of accepting the most obviously ridiculous propositions and which is attempting to force the majority of the country to go along with these, which creates even more society-wide discord. It's difficult to conceive of anything that could make the situation worse. So naturally, enter the midwit. Midwit is a term that has been seeing a lot of use on social media in recent months. What exactly is a midwit? It refers to someone who is smart enough, for example, to manage to obtain a college degree, but who is not capable of really understanding what they've learned or what they're trying to learn in another discipline. This, however, is coupled with an absolute assurance on their part that what they've been told by some progressive authority figure is unquestionably true and smart, and that it's dumb to challenge it. As such, the essence of midwittery is not so much based on level of intelligence as it is the willingness to commit oneself to believing oftentimes false propositions based on progressive psychological and/or ideological convenience. In most uses, we're talking about people on the left who believe obvious nonsense and who should really know better, but don't because of ideological blinders that force them to accede to patently false premises. They're midwits because regardless of actual cognitive ability, they act like people who aren't smart enough to think beyond the narrative they're fed. As such, they put tremendous stock in what officially designated experts say, even when those experts are obviously wrong. What makes midwits so dangerous is their willingness to believe propaganda and then enforce the aims of that propaganda upon everybody else, using their unwavering self-assurance as ipso facto moral justification. They're smart enough to grasp what the propaganda is telling them, but not smart enough to understand or accept the reasons for why the propaganda might be wrong. This touches on the reason for propaganda and why it is so effective when used by governments. It's important to understand that propaganda doesn't need to be convincing to everyone. It merely needs to be convincing to enough people that it creates society-wide pressure on the rest to conform. The purpose of propaganda is to appeal to the great masses of people who can't or won't critically examine anything, which will be roughly 70 to 80% of any given population. Thus, it doesn't really matter what the few who see through it think. Their voices will just be drowned out in the white noise and perhaps officially suppressed as well. Nowhere in recent years has midwittery been more prominent than in the incessant calls to believe the science as a prelude to accepting some ideologically progressive program. Left-wing policymakers have discovered the magic formula of getting the modern American to go along with any proposal, no matter how ridiculous or impossible. You call it science, and it becomes unquestionably true. Hence the millennia-old observation, as in empirically evident, that male and female are basically immutable is rejected as superstition, while appealing to a relative handful of obvious genetic defects and psychological illness to justify mutilating impressionable children is science. Suggesting that the sun may be primarily responsible for climate fluctuation is derided as dangerous. But ignoring everything actual science knows about complexity and feedback mechanisms to posit a simplistic effect from carbon dioxide is science, and so on. Actual knowledge is replaced by endogenous progressive hyper-reality. The role of the midwit is to tell you to stop believing actual science and to believe science instead. As we've all seen, the past year has seen an explosion in the growth of the midwit infestation. Indeed, COVID-19 has been like putting rabbit turds on a mushroom patch. You know the Karen at the grocery store screeching at you to wear a mask and who double masks while driving alone in her own car? That's a midwit who doesn't actually understand how PPE works. Yet you can be sure that she hangs on every word from the obnoxious little goblin, Dr. Fauci. Every bad policy, every idiotic response to the pandemic that has been destructive, counterproductive, and population reductive has had its midwit cheerleaders willing to shout down anyone who questions the official narratives. Lockdowns destroy the natural human impulse to congregate and socialize in a civil society. The ham-handed approach by the political and medical establishments to things like vaccine rollouts grossly undermines public trust in institutions that ought to be serving as social glue. The destruction of small businesses and the centralization of economic activity into the hands of a few mega corporations doesn't just put people out of work. It removes the foundation of localism that creates genuine bonds of community. Universal masking removes even the very ability of people to interact with each other in a normal way by dealing with each other literally face to face. The stupid, unthinking, anti-thinking midwits have been weaponized by the powers that be to take it upon themselves to police everyone else for infractions against the official narrative. As willing tools of the bad faith actors who make policy in government and the boardroom, they bear much of the fault for this state of affairs. Their willingness to destroy other people's lives, to inform on any dissenters, to cheer on the collapse of civil society, all for their own selfish sense of moral superiority, mark them out as the very enemies of humanity. And when all is said and done, and true normalcy and social stability have finally returned, whenever that might be, these midwits, along with the rest of the progressive cabal, must be punished for their crimes against order, decency, and human society. And again, that's a piece called Weaponizing Midwits in the COVID-19 War and Civil Society from the Neo-Ciceronian Times.wordpress.com. I'm going to be moving to the book club very quickly. We haven't even had the interview between Oprah and Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz, but it's one of the biggest stories in the world. Again, I'll note that I spend a fair amount of time reading comments on gossip sites in an attempt to gauge public opinion. And in the United States, certainly in Britain, is running very heavily against the Duke and Duchess. But wait, there are always simps ready to leap to the defense of a damsel in distress. This is from The Mail by Charlie Langston. Meghan Mertz's Canadian Suits co-star Patrick Adams launches extraordinary attack on the toxic, archaic, and shameless royal family. Of course, Meghan is saying, in the latest promo, that she will not be silenced. Who's trying to silence her? She never seems to shut up. Patrick J. Adams tweeted, Meghan Mertz and I spent the better part of a decade working together on Suits. From day one, she was an enthusiastic, kind, cooperative, giving, joyful, and supportive member of our television family. She remained that person and colleague as fame, prestige, and power accrued. She has always been a powerful woman with a deep sense of morality and a fierce worth ethic, and has never been afraid to speak up, be heard, and defend herself and those she holds dear. Like the rest of the world, I watched her navigate the last few years in astonishment. She fell in love, moved to a new country, became a household name across the entire globe, and began the difficult work of trying to find her place in a family dynamic that can best be described as complicated and, at worst, seemingly archaic and toxic. Bravo. Bravo, sir. So brave. So very brave of you. So bear with me just a moment. I have to open up the book that we are talking about and some related materials. The book is by Helen Andrews, and it is called Boomers. Don't you just hate them? I note that Vox Day seems to be coming very close to advocating genocide of the boomers. My word, he gets exercised about this. So the book is called Boomers, the Men and Women Who Promised Freedom and Delivered Disaster. I highly recommend this book. It is one which is well worth your money. Helen Andrews, it's typical of these types of books that they're gotcha books, scoring points. The whole point of the book is to score points. Helen Andrews is a thoughtful young woman, and I was greatly impressed reading the book by the depth of her research and of her knowledge. So, the boomers. I think I can wrap up or just assert the popularly now held notion about boomers by reference to a Community episode. The one about Glee. Remember that show, Glee? So the members of the study group in Community are being bullied into replacing the Glee Club, which died mysteriously in a bus accident. And they resist this because Glee is lame. But they are seduced one by one, and they get to Pierce Hawthorne, the boomer extraordinaire. And so they try to get him to join Glee. Music. You love music, right, Pierce? Your generation invented music. And Pierce says, well, no, perfected, maybe. And Annie says, Pierce, they're just trying to pander to your demographics' documented historical vanity. Yes, exactly. And so Troy and Abed sing a song that they have devised, which sums up the boomers perfectly. Santa Claus was born in 1945. He had a boogie-woogie Coca-Cola Army jive. And when the commies gave the polio to Doris Day, Santa helped the Beatles chase McCarthy away. That baby boomer Santa, he's never going to die. Santa fought at Woodstock in Vietnam and smoked a ton of acid and burnt his bra. And then in 1970, he did more drugs and his hair stayed long and he grew a mustache. Baby boomer Santa, he's going to stay alive. Santa invented Spielberg and microchips. Santa invented Coca-Cola and aerobics. He made the Iron Curtain and the Gremlins too. Fake butter and AIDS and Twin Peaks. Baby boomer Santa, thank you for MTV. Baby boomer Santa, thank you for everything. So by this time, Chevy Chase, Pierce Hawthorne, has become a member of the cult. And he sings, you're welcome. You're welcome for everything in the world. You're welcome. You're welcome for all that I bring to the world. I'm baby boomer Santa. I bring the gift of the world. Baby boomer Santa. I'm an American pearl. Yeah. So Helen Andrews is a senior editor at the American Conservative, author of Boomers. Previously, she was managing editor of the Washington Examiner magazine and a Robert Novak journalism fellow. As I say, a clever and attractive young woman. She notes, she explains in the book that she thought that the best way to explain the boomer phenomenon is to examine the lives of 6 prominent boomers, much as Lytton Strachey eviscerated the Victorians with his similar book, Eminent Victorians. Florence Nightingale, ooh, don't you just hate her? Cardinal Manning, don't you just hate him? I mean, it was deliberately provocative. Who could be against Florence Nightingale? So she writes, and those of us who would attack the baby boomers, what do we have on our side? She says, I have no quarrel with my parents who were born in the 1950s. My father, who died while this manuscript was being written, was a liberal Southern lawyer of the Atticus Finch type, and like Atticus, beyond reproach. My mother was a bit of a hippie when she was younger. She majored in pottery at a college that no longer exists. But the only thing I have to reproach her for on that score is that I never learned how to put on makeup. They were wonderful parents, and I'm very grateful to them. Criticisms of this book, I would say, I think the book neglects the topic of scale, and which has forced many of the changes that the boomers are blamed for. Not that they are certainly worthy of a great deal of blame. But I remember my old publisher, Ted Byfield. He used to devoted many columns and a whole book to ranting against what he called the 60s people. And the 60s people, I always thought, they did not arrive ex nihilo. They were part of a process of degeneration. And again, I would argue that the boomers are the process of degeneration. Also, the cult of the expert did not begin with the boomer. I mean, Christopher Lasch has demonstrated that, you can trace this back to the 1920s in America, perhaps even earlier. She writes, before the Renaissance, would-be rediscoverers of Aristotle were sometimes told by zealous churchmen that anything written before Christ was ipso facto not worth rediscovering. This is approximately how the boomers feel about themselves. Any suggestion that the Western world might not altogether be better off for their influence is immediately met with an indignant litany of all the segments of humanity who previously labored in a sad state of abject non-personhood before the boomers came along and broke their chains. So deeply ingrained is this sentiment that even the boomers' harshest critics always hasten to add their reassurances that they would not want to undo the least particle of the legacy of the 1960s, only temper its excesses. I'm sympathetic to this line of argument, Andrews writes, to a point. As a woman, if I had been born in another century, my schooling might well have stopped at age 12. On the other hand, in this age, I attended some of the best schools in the world until I was 21 and still didn't receive an education that those benighted eras would have considered standard. Is this necessarily an improvement? In order to attempt an impartial appraisal of their legacy, it may be necessary to bracket the boomers' conversation-stopping claims to be mankind's greatest liberators for at least a preliminary moment, though this is like asking a medieval theologian to bracket the incarnation. Boomers have never hesitated to make themselves look better by massaging the historical record. So a good place to start an examination of their achievements is with a clear-eyed look at how life has changed in the last 70 years. People who claim to be liberators often exaggerate how bad things were before they came along in order to make their achievements seem greater. Or in cases where their so-called liberation unleashed dark forces they did not anticipate, they pretend that things have always been this bad. Boomers do a bit of both, so it is useful to put their self-flattering narrative through a fact check. Women have always worked, but never in American history did women outnumber men in the labor force until January 2020. That is absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. Apparently the purpose, the primary or perhaps the sole purpose of the entire female sex is to embiggen the GDP. She writes, you didn't have to be a socialist to guess that 1970s feminism wasn't going to work out well. Just a decent observer of the psychology of the leading feminists. Betty Friedan was a self-obsessed malcontent who deliberately concealed her past as a fellow traveler of the Communist Party USA in order to make the feminine mystique seem like an honest memoir and not political propaganda. Gloria Steinem had good personal reasons for considering the nuclear family a trap. Her father was a ne'er-do-well hustler, practically a con man, and her fragile mother spent long stretches of her life institutionalized, both before and after their divorce. This gave young Gloria such an abhorrence of domesticity that in her first 2 decades as a political organizer, she never spent longer than 8 days at home before setting off on the road again. 1 in 5 white women on depressants and 1 in 6 of all Americans on some kind of psychiatric medication. This would not have been possible without the boomer era's broader embrace of mind-altering drugs. It is hard to say which is sadder, the number of people who have overdosed on heroin or the number permanently fuzzying their emotional perception of the universe because they were once sad enough to pop a positive on a PHQ-9. Most depressive episodes end on their own within 6 to 8 months. Prescriptions, unfortunately for patients, but fortunately for the manufacturers of Wellbutrin, last indefinitely. It is interesting to note how closely drugs have tracked the boomers as their needs and tastes have changed with age. Marijuana gave way to cocaine when they became old and rich enough to prefer the champagne of drugs, as the New York Times called it in 1974. On the legal side, the fad for Ritalin conveniently arose at exactly the right time to make the boomers' school-age children easier to manage. This mass resort to psychotropics has been clothed in the most nauseating sanctimony from drug dealers, no less than from mental health professionals. The last barrier between the dealers and the real money, Adderall money, Zoloft money, was the lingering taboo that made making money off recreational dope somehow not respectable. With the former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, born 1949, making marijuana legalization his retirement project, we may live to see the day when the street dealer's pharmacopoeia is covered by Medicaid, at which point the boomer drug revolution will be complete. Slack-jawed, glaze-eyed, mindlessly shoving junk food in a state of perfect passivity. No need to go to a drug den to see that. Just any living room where the TV is on. The British sociologist Richard Hoggart was the first person to spot that the rise of pop culture would be a revolution in what it means to be human, on par with the advent of psychology. He also spotted that it would be regressive. Instead of consuming art made by people much like themselves, the lower classes would be reduced to consuming art made by jobbing hacks, catering to their audience's lowest appetites. We are a democracy whose working people, he warned, are exchanging their birthright for a mass of pinups. Hoggart first became worried about the effects of mass culture while teaching adult education classes in Yorkshire after World War II. In his book, The Uses of Literacy, 1957, described Hoggart's upbringing in the respectable slums of Leeds in a house too poor to afford solid meat except a bit of rabbit occasionally. Yet he could not help noticing that those unschooled slum dwellers were mentally independent in a way that his post-war students were not. His grandmother's range of cultural reference was narrow and unimpressive, consisting mainly of homespun aphorisms and the Bible, but at least her mind had not been colonized by pulp novels and Hollywood movies. The difference between the old culture and mass culture was like the difference between preparing a meal and microwaving one. And Hoggart's students have been rendered helpless in the same way as someone who has never been taught how to cook. Andrews argues later in the book, and she's absolutely right about this, that there is no such thing as high culture or low culture or middle culture anymore. There's just the culture. And so an episode of I Am Jazz is just as culturally valuable as anything else that could be made. We're not, it's elitist to say that one is better than the other. Drugged up, divorced, ignorant, and indebted, but at least they did it out of idealism. That has been the baby boomers' universal alibi. Our intentions were good. Later, they will admit perhaps that idealism curdled, motivation flagged, the weaker-willed sold out. Still, the original impulse was altruistic. It would be quite a blow to their self-image if it were to be discovered that the boomers' various crusades were selfish from the very beginning. Yes, she talks about the introduction of co-ed dorms, which was shocking, in the 1970s. But the argument was made that men, they need the amenity of women as sexual partners. Yes, that was the argument. Now, of course, and this is a problem I have with the book as a whole, the boomers were taught. We're not self-taught, They were taught by previous generations. They were taught by the so-called greatest generation and the so-called silent generation. It was they who put ridiculous ideas into our head, or into our heads. For instance, that men and women are essentially interchangeable, that you can be anything or do anything if you put your mind to it, that there's no essential difference between the various peoples of the world, that more and more and even more freedom is a good thing, and that choice, not virtue, is best. So she begins with Steve Jobs. Now, I guess it's taken as a given that Steve Jobs was a great man. I beg to differ, actually. He was certainly great in the sense that he engineered a personality cult, and he led people to believe that possession of an Apple product made one a superior, even perhaps a more moral person. I'm afraid I'm with Charlie Brooker in this, who wrote, "I hate Macs. I've always hated Macs. I hate people who use Macs. I even hate people who don't use Macs, but sometimes wish they did. Macs are glorified Fisher-Price activity centers for adults. Computers for scaredy cats too nervous to learn how proper computers work. Computers for people who earnestly believe in feng shui." Steve Jobs, well, according to Andrews, he was quite haunted by being abandoned by his parents. And that it seemed, she quotes people to say that Steve seemed to be looking, for validation throughout his life, that he was never going to, get. For a generation's designated idealist, Jobs was still a conspicuous asshole, not just when he was making money either, but even at his most hippie-ish. Consider his wedding cake when he married Laureen Powell in a Zen Buddhist ceremony. But of course, in 1971, Jobs served an eggless, dairyless, no refined sugar wedding cake that many of his guests found inedible. That proves that his vaguely mystical asceticism about food was genuine, if he wasn't willing to let it slide for a special occasion. On the other hand, forcing your friends and admirers to eat a flavorless vegan loaf is also a power trip. Yes, Jon Stewart. He took against Apple after they went after Gizmodo and got the police in California to raid a writer's apartment. There was a similar plot line on Mike Judge's show, Silicon Valley. Apple, you guys were the rebels, man, the underdogs. People believed in you. Yes. The funny idea of what constitutes an underdog these days. Apple went from literally a garage to an enormously successful company in a very small number of years. Helen Enders has some good things to say about Steve Jobs. For instance, he insisted that Macintoshes be assembled, that Apple products be assembled in the United States of America. Tim Cook, his successor, didn't care about American jobs. Steve Jobs also insisted that he was not going to let pornography on the iPhone. He said, "We believe we have a moral responsibility to keep porn off the iPhone." Yes, I don't want freedom from porn. Porn is just fine, and I think my wife would agree, retorted Ryan Tate, editor of the Gawker affiliate site Valleywag. Jobs just shook his head and uttered the foremost heretical words in the boomer canon. It's not about freedom. It's about Apple trying to do the right thing for its users. The biggest difference between Jobs and his fellow boomers comes down to this. They were institution destroyers, and he was an institution builder. He told his biographer, Walter Isaacson, that he wanted to do what Hewlett and his friend David Packard had done, which was create a company that was so imbued with innovative creativity that it would outlive them. And I guess he has. But hang on here just a second. Timothy Cook came to Apple from Compaq in 1998 after a long career at IBM. Although also a boomer, he was in many ways Steve Jobs' opposite. Southern, courtly, a sports obsessive, quiet, dependable. The partnership worked because Jobs loved the way Cook took logistics off his desk and allowed him to focus on the parts of being CEO he enjoyed. Jobs could spend his time on product development and design, safe in the knowledge that Cook had the boring stuff under control. Now, Tim Cook, yes, he's all about inclusion and diversity. Steve Jobs thought that it was just a waste of time and energy for companies to say, oh, yes, we have our own charity and, devote to charity or whatever. Jobs thought that Apple was a business. The climax of Apple's shifts to wokeness was Cook's coming out, which took the form of an op-ed from Bloomberg in 2014. Well, I've never denied my sexuality. I haven't publicly acknowledged it either. So let me be clear. I'm proud to be gay and consider being gay among the greatest gifts God has given me. But incredibly, Cook went further. Being gay has given me a deeper understanding of what it means to be in the minority and provided a window into the challenges that people in other minority groups deal with every day. It has given me the confidence to be myself. That is a typically obnoxious boomer sentiment. Always arguing from the particular to the general. Always, always, always. One would not want to give the appearance of endorsing Schumpeter's argument about John Maynard Keynes, that Keynes disdained the long term because he was gay and childless and therefore had no reason to care about the future. When Neil Ferguson mentioned this argument during a conference Q&A in 2013, it prompted such a storm of outrage that he nearly lost his job over it, even after he apologized unreservedly. Aaron Sorkin is up next. And Helen argues, says that I suppose Aaron Sorkin is a great man because his show, The West Wing, influenced, it's responsible for how people think that politics works. That staffers, backroom boys and girls, they are moral heroes. Yeah, I've known a great many of these people, and they're not moral heroes at all. They are quite the opposite. Increasingly, these people have had no other interest in their lives except politics, and they have devoted themselves to climbing up the greasy pole from the time that they entered university or even earlier. Our politics are dominated now by people who have virtually zero real life experience of anything other than politics. But 1 in 3 Americans told a Kaiser survey that the show ER helped them make healthcare choices. And 1 in 5 doctors say they've had patients ask them about diseases and treatments they've seen on primetime TV. Yes, as she mentions, Sorkin's show Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, which came out about the same time as 30 Rock. And there's a big difference between the two shows. Is that 30 Rock was very funny, and Studio 60, despite being about a comedy show, was not funny in the slightest. It was just so pompous. Oh, let's comb over this joke for half an hour. Would it be responsible for us to tell this joke? Could it possibly unduly influence the presidential campaign or some nonsense? But sadly, as Helen Andrews reports, Aaron Sorkin is very interested in shows about showbiz or the news and the like. And no, people are not interested in this. And I guess Aaron Sorkin is responsible for everyone knowing what POTUS means and FLOTUS and SCOTUS as well. Yeah, it's funny. Is The West Wing a liberal show? The objection has been voiced. Soren admits that when Ronald Reagan won the 1984 election, when he was 23 years old, he did not know a single person who had voted for him, and neither his milieu nor his personal politics have gotten more conservative since then. I think this is one of the greatest faults of the boomers is, and this has been passed on to subsequent generations, I don't want to be with people who are not exactly like me. You know, it makes it hard for people to get along when people segregate themselves in such a manner. And it makes it hard for these people to, like Aaron Sorkin, to understand people who don't share their beliefs. And she notes how Sorkin failed completely when he sought to have people express conservative views on his shows. But yes, this is an all-time favorite, nor is late night sketch comedy as immune from idealistic self-regard as Sorkin's critics alleged. The Saturday after the 2016 election, which also happened to be the week that Leonard Cohen died, Kate McKinnon opened Saturday Night Live by performing a somber, joke-free rendition of his ballad Hallelujah, alone at a piano, dressed all in white and made up to look like Hillary Clinton. Before handing off to the main titles, she looked into the camera and said with bottomless sincerity, "I'm not giving up, and neither should you." Among the many entertainment bloggers and Twitter celebrities who thanked McKinnon for bringing America together for a much-needed moment of healing were doubtless some of the same people who would accuse Sorkin of taking Saturday Night Live too seriously. You know, I saw Kate McKinnon open Saturday Night Live on that Saturday after the election, and I kept thinking, okay, there's going to be a twist. There's going to be a joke here. Oh, we're getting pretty close to the end here. Come on, where's the joke? Where's the twist? What? There's no joke? That's it? That's it? Yes, sadly, the poor reception of Studio 60 made it clear the average American viewer is simply not as passionate about television as Aaron Sorkin is. There's no denying that network news will never return to the golden age of Murrow and Cronkite. Was it really such a golden age? Walter Cronkite, he seems great compared to what we have now because the decadence in the news profession has been so deep. But the very idea of the half-hour network news, and of which after commercials you would have 20 minutes or whatever. That's all the news you need to know, etc. Oh, you're well informed because you watched a 22-minute news program. I've never bought it. Oh, and his show, The Newsroom. How pompous can you get? Sorkin has his newsroom heroes refuse to cover the Anthony Weiner sexting scandal because they think his constituents should care only how he votes. They turned out an exclusive on General David Petraeus' resignation because the story, while juicy, doesn't provide any information the voters should have had before they cast a ballot. Yeah. Yes, it turns out Aaron Sorkin has turned his back on television. He's only going to do movies now. Who would have thought that a Wednesday night TV drama would change the way people who work in the White House view their own jobs, Andrews writes. But if Sorkin ever wants to see the abusers of TV's great power punished, he'd better hope that he's wrong about the afterlife and the evangelical Christians he hates so much are right. She then moves on to Jeffrey Sachs and compares him to General Charles George Gordon of Khartoum. That Jeffrey Sachs is a truly citoyen du monde, citizen of the world. Despite this, his best-selling book, The End of Poverty, emphatically denies any resemblance to the infamous white man's burden, the right and obligation of European and European-descended whites to rule the lives of others around the world, which they blithely did with a contradictory mix of naivete, compassion, and brutality. Still, it is hard not to notice that Sachs's career as a development economist has been essentially identical to the imperial project. He goes to foreign countries to which he has no previous connection and tells them how to run their governments. It's no use protesting that he was invited. Gordon was invited everywhere he went to. Not one of the supposed differences between Sachs and his imperial predecessors amounts to very much once the usual slanders have been rebutted. Yeah. So he is the expert on economies. Yes, Bolivia. He'll sort out, the Americans sorted out Bolivia. Helen Andrews points out, and Jeffrey Sachs is going to sort out the whole world. Sachs said he went to Bolivia because he wanted to witness living history. Hyperinflation was something he had studied in textbooks but never expected to see in his lifetime. At the very moment his career as the Indiana Jones of economics was hitting its peak, with governments all over the world clamoring for his services, history presented Sachs with an even more singular opportunity, the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. If I'd been called the Indiana Jones of economics or anything else, I would be deeply ashamed. And there's kind of a sinister detachment to this. Oh, yes, he'd read about hyperinflation in books, but he'd never seen it in real life. So Sachs goes to Poland and tells them what is what. His initial trips were paid for by George Soros. Oh, yes, and remember, people, that George Soros, he's just a rich man. It's not like he considers, countries, chess pieces for him to move around. No. That would be a conspiracy theory. Sachs's later trips were paid for by the United Nations University in Helsinki. That was the most remarkable thing about the foreign advisors who descended on Poland in the early 1990s, how few of them were directly employed by the Poles. 2/3 of the money USAID spent in Eastern Europe in 1991 went to technical assistance, which means it was hoovered up by contractors like the Big Six accounting firms for their fees and expenses. The Polish Vice Minister of Finance complained of these advisors that the U.S. government is paying them to provide advice to us without asking us, even without informing us. Sardonic officials joked that USAID seemed to be solving the West's unemployment problem, not Poland. Yes, when Jeffrey Sachs departed Poland and left behind, as he thought, a job well done, he did what every great man does when he is overwhelmed by hubris. He decided to go to Russia. Quite good, that. Interviewers say that when asked about his time in Russia, Sachs becomes defensive, bristling, his baritone voice jumping an octave. His biographer, Nina Monk, found that subject made him suddenly prickly like a hedgehog. Golly, I wonder why. Do I consider Russia a failure of the West? Yes, definitely. Do I consider it a personal failure? No. I find that absolutely preposterous. Sachs insists that the worst outcomes in Russia were all caused by decisions contrary to his advice. This is quite true. He told the Yeltsin government not to privatize their resource companies right away, but rather to keep them in state hands to give the government a stable source of revenue. Instead, they quickly auctioned off Russia's oil and gas assets, which spawned a pernicious class of oligarchs and also worsened the revenue crisis of the late 1990s when the state proved too weak to collect more than a fraction of the taxes it's owed. But it wasn't as an advisor that Sachs inflicted the greatest damage. It was head of the Harvard Institute for International Development, founded in 1962 as the Development Advisory Service for the purpose of sending Harvard economists to places like Colombia, Namibia, and Indonesia to give policy advice. In exchange, the economists were allowed to write research papers about their pet programs' results. The military-industrial complex, or the how would you say, the academic-industrial complex. The head of HIID's Russia project was Andrei Schleifer, a protege of Larry Summers, and like Summers, both ambitious and precocious. Things went very, very bad with Harvard in Russia. But Schleifer somehow survived this. Investment bankers who specialize in emerging markets have a saying: in Russia, if you make them mad, they'll kill you. In Africa, if you make them mad, they'll try to kill you, but by the time their plan comes together, you'll be gone. By the time Sachs disentangled himself from Russia, everyone there wanted to kill him, but he was already gone to Africa. Sachs did not start out as a bully by disposition. It was a trait he acquired. He attempted to defend his public remarks as within the bounds of fair debate when Stanley Fischer, famously the most mild-mannered fellow at the IMF, interrupted him to shout, "You know that's not true," and tick off 5 occasions in which Sachs had publicly impugned his competence and integrity. If Sachs was bashful about insulting people then, he isn't now. His mass emails are known to include incandescent lines like, "Frankly, I find your approach disreputable, as well as economically ignorant." On the phone, he can be overheard shouting things like, "He's a punk. He can go to hell." Yes. Yes, again, the boomer belief that, things went bad. Things went bad, but our intentions were good. And then we move to Camille Paglia. And she describes the lesbian catfight between Paglia and Susan Sontag. Very, very amusing. I think that occasionally Camille Paglia says something insightful or amusing, but as they say, a stopped clock is right twice a day. As far as her books go, I find them unreadable. That it's an unfortunate side effect of immersion in academia that so many of them cannot write clearly and fluently. Andrews talks about the decadent movement in England and in France. She mentions Joris Karl Huysman. I find it a curious omission that she does not note that Huysman converted to Catholicism and even took minor orders. She writes that Camille Paglia is a decadent of the Anglo type, which, after all, is the kind anyone would choose if they had a choice. They were the nice ones. They were optimists. They were elitists, but they believed in democracy. She describes Camille Paglia's long struggle to get academic recognition, even a decent job in academia. Yes, she writes, historians of the 25th century with 3 paragraphs to give the 21st in their textbooks will be more likely to mention the proliferation of pornography than any living president. It is almost impossible for people under 30 to understand how porn-saturated the world is compared with any other period in human history, the Rome of Heliogabalus not accepted. Any 13-year-old with a smartphone can watch video of almost any sex act he cares to, as often as he likes, for free and in total privacy. Technology cannot bear all the blame for this. The advent of streaming video in the early years of the 21st century would not have been such a rout for decency if the legal and cultural barriers against pornography had not been completely obliterated in what was, in retrospect, a remarkably short period of time. Well, you could say the same thing, about the gay rights movement, about feminism, about the civil rights movement. Essentially, they were kicking open a door that was already open. As I've noted before, at the end of the supposedly terribly repressive 1950s, Playboy magazine already had 1 million subscribers. But Camille Paglia, she loves decadence, and she loves the gays. But she had a rude awakening. The golden age of tagging along to drag bars and discussing the finer points of Betty Davis did not last. I remember when the doors of the men's bars closed in my face, she recalled. It was probably 1974. The hostility to a female presence was palpable. The reason pitch black orgy rooms and sex shows, chained men sodomized in slings were coming into fashion. Yes, but apparently Camille Paglia has been unable to discern anything about homosexuals from their behavior. Oh, they're all so witty. Oh, I don't know. Perhaps they once were, but it seems to me that for decades now, they've been little more than disco dummies. So, Al Sharpton comes up next. Yes, Al Sharpton is a venerable figure now. Helen Enders talks a lot about the old politics, say of ward healers. who were low-level operatives responsible for, a neighborhood, say. And these people knew what their constituents thought because they would tell them. And of course, they've been replaced by polls and focus groups now. In her discussion of affirmative action, she talks about, again, the old days of machine politics where, okay, we have to give one position, one slot to a Jew, one to an Irishman, one to Italian. And, I suppose an argument can be made for justifying affirmative action on that basis. But the problem is there has been no quid pro quo. That is to say, I can well understand a deal, an affirmative action deal, which goes like this. We are going to give you these privileges. We're going to give you this stuff. You're going to have a guaranteed amount of jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, what you have to do for us is you have to tone down your rhetoric. You have to stop screaming about how white people are a cancer on human history. That's a line from Susan Sontag. You have to rein in your own people. But we just see the reverse. I mean, in New York City and in other places, the machine politics meant that the Irish and the Italians and the Jews and the pre-immigration Americans, they got along. They do not get along now. All that the affirmative action regime has led to is demand for ever more affirmative action and greater enmity from Black people towards white people, and now, as we see, Asian people as well. It's a remarkable thing to me that the United States has come to a position where certainly the Black elite no longer considers itself to be American. They're Black or African American. American, no, because America is an evil country and has always been evil. And, the original sin of slavery has marked America permanently, and that cannot be effaced. She ends with Sonia Sotomayor and has some very amusing things to say, not just about her, but other Supreme Court justices and the level of their intelligence. She does not address the rumors, say, that Sonia Sotomayor was functionally illiterate when she entered university. But this is a very selfish and rude woman who believes, and this is a typical boomer belief, this is a Dunning-Kruger effect, that she is nowhere near as intelligent as she thinks she is. And yes, Puerto Rican. Apparently, she's been discriminated against because she's Puerto Rican. I'm Puerto Rican, Oh, well, yes, that's obviously a very good reason for promoting you again and again and again. Finally, she deals with the millennials. It's always the people who most hate the idea of turning it to their parents who end up doing so. The millennials blame the boomers for wrecking the country, yet rather than break free from their influence, we continue seeing the world in their terms. Our social justice activists devote their lives to the same causes with only the most minute updates in terminology, but an agenda otherwise unchanged. Our rebels wear the same Che Guevara t-shirts, do the same drugs, obsess over the same music. I remember being surprised back in high school that the stoners cutting class behind the gym all had Black Sabbath and Pink Floyd patches on their jackets and not anything more contemporary. Worst of all, millennials seem intent on making the boomers' same mistakes. This is a book about the baby boom generation that has so far gone without mentioning the anti-war movement. Yes, of course, the same people who were against the war, who made their bones campaigning against the Vietnam War, people like Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, became suddenly very pro-war. There was no problem in the world that killing people couldn't solve. I think there's a very simple reason for this, which is that Vietnam wasn't their war. But Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan, yes, it's their wars. And since, they're boomers, they must be good things. We bomb people because we love them. And I'll end with this. Helen Andrews writes, the great 1969 BBC miniseries Civilization ends on a note of naivete. The host, Kenneth Clark, is wandering around the then newly built University of East Anglia, surrounded by boomer students hunched over the books or buzzing in conversation. When I look at the world about me in the light of these programs, I don't at all feel as though we are entering on a new period of barbarism, he says. In fact, I should doubt if so many people have ever been as well-fed, as well-read, as bright-minded and curious and as critical as the young are today. Clark expresses his belief that although the young people of 1969 may think poorly of existing institutions and want to abolish them, they will soon realize it was institutions which made society work and buckle down to carrying on the great Western tradition. Such optimism, alas, was misplaced. Kenneth Clark was wrong about the boomers. They did not take their place in the chain of civilization. And if the boomers think that they can unmoor millennials from our past, immiserate our futures, tell us we're rich because we can afford iPhones but not families, teach us that narcissism is the highest form of patriotism, and still have a nation resilient enough to bounce back to normal after the younger generation starts to riot in the streets, then the boomers will be wrong about us. Once again, I give this book my highest recommendation. So many of these books, right-wing books, yeah, okay, I know that. Tell me something I didn't know. And if you read boomers, and you should, you will learn many things that you did not know previously. One last thing about the baby boomers. I'll just keep this short because it's 6:15. The boomers, what is it, 1946 to 1964? But a lot of such was the rate of change during that time that you see significant differences between the older and younger boomers. Now, I have some self-interest here because I was born in 1955. But what has been dubbed Generation Jones by Jonathan Pontel identifies this cohort as those born between 1954 to 1965. And you will notice, well, to give one example, if you look at the people responsible for what they call punk music, were almost all born between 1954 and 1956. And amongst the Generation Jones, well, to give one example, let's see, I was, 18 years old with the first oil crisis. So that is to say, there was just an understanding that life was not going to be as rich as it was previously for as many people as it had been. And amongst the cohort born between 1954 and 1965, you have a much, say, higher level of cynicism about progress and the various other nostrums that the boomers came to identify with. So, too long, didn't read version of my talk. Helen Andrews' book Boomers is great, and you should buy it. Final look at the chat. Fake olive oil. Ashley Bravo says, is Hotepism the future of black nationalism? More talk about olive oil. Cecil Henry says, no man, no problem. Sincerely, Uncle Stalin. Ashley Bravo says, Cesar Chavez was actually an ethno-nationalist too. Indeed, he was. Indeed, he was. He was fighting for his people, not for the whole world. He was an American, and he was not fighting for Mexico. Ashley Bravo says, Malcolm X says blacks were never part of the white American nation. Yes, Plymouth Rock landed on us. Yes, indeed. I have a lot more time for Malcolm X than I do for Martin Luther King because Malcolm X was smart and Martin Luther King was not. Okay. Woody Allen married his adopted daughter. No. Woody Allen was never married to Mia Farrow. He married Mia Farrow's adopted daughter. Now, getting involved with a woman as crazy as Mia Farrow, well, again, it's not. There was plenty of evidence before Woody Allen appeared on the scene, so he can't say that he wasn't warned. Okay, that's it for the show today and this week. So what's coming up next week? On Theatre Thursday, I will be talking about a comedy from Ireland, 2011, called The Guard, directed by John Michael McDonagh. And on the book club next week, I will be talking about a book by Matthew Hungholtz-Hetling called A Libertarian Walks into a Bear. Yes, it's about those heady days when libertarians thought that they were going to colonize an American state. And on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about Big Star, Beautiful Losers, a band from Memphis which should have conquered the world, but didn't. So I'll be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could really appreciate at this time, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, or if you're in Canada, you can make a donation to my live stream via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.